On the morning of December 13, 2006, world-renowned adventure racer Danelle Ballengee set out for a run. For her, it was as routine as morning coffee is for most people. Just 2 hours on familiar trails in Moab. Nothing unusual. She had no idea that within 3 days her name would be on national news, and rescue teams across the American West would talk about her survival story as one of the most remarkable they had ever seen. Between that ordinary start and her eventual rescue, she would suffer a fall that shattered her body and, at the same time, challenged everything people thought they knew about human endurance and a dog's loyalty. The most powerful moment was still to come, not in the crash itself, but in the desperate hours when hope of rescue was nearly gone. By age 35, Ballengee had a resume that amazed even her fellow athletes. 4 victories at the Pikes Peak Marathon. A record-setting climb of all 54 of Colorado's 14,000-foot peaks in just 2 weeks. 3 world championship titles in endurance running. Sports Illustrated had once called her the strongest female athlete on the planet. For Danelle, pain was fuel. Obstacles weren't dead ends, just challenges that demanded more time and grit. Where others saw walls, she found energy to push through. That morning began like hundreds before it. She answered sponsor emails, drafted training plans for clients, and took care of household chores. By 10 o'clock, it was all behind her. She loaded her dog, Taz, into her aging white Ford Ranger with a kayak strapped to the roof. Taz, a 3-year-old mix of German Shepherd and Golden Retriever rescued from a shelter, had become her constant training partner. His endless energy matched her lifestyle perfectly. On the way, they stopped at Burger King. A chicken sandwich, fries, coffee. And of course, a little something for Taz. He always got his share. Low clouds hung over Moab's red cliffs. The air was cool and crisp, perfect running weather. The plan was simple. An 8-mile loop along familiar trails. She left her phone and wallet locked in the truck. For a short run, it seemed unnecessary to tell anyone her route. All she carried was water, 2 energy gels, an MP3 player, and a light jacket. Just the basics. By midday, they were deep in the canyons. The first hour was flawless. 5 miles behind her, half the water gone, spirits high. Taz bounded ahead, then doubled back, turning the run into a playful game. Everything felt like just another routine training day. But at 1:20 p.m., everything changed. Danelle's foot landed on black ice hidden under a layer of lichen. She slipped instantly. She tried to steady herself, but the loose volcanic rock beneath her feet gave way. Within seconds, she was sliding out of control. She plunged off the slope, falling more than 60 feet, slamming into rock ledges again and again. When the rumble of stones faded, silence filled the canyon, broken only by her faint groans. Those sounds marked the beginning of a story that would prove the bond between a woman and her dog can stand between life and death. Strangely, her first moments after impact brought relief. Danelle forced herself to check her body. Right arm working, right leg moving, left side still responsive. No numbness in her back. Mind clear. Her first thought was simple but full of hope. I'm not dead. I'm not paralyzed. I'm alive. I'm not paralyzed. Taz reached her first. He was panting hard from the steep descent, his chest heaving, worry shining in his brown eyes. He sniffed at her, whimpered softly, and tried to lick her face. To him, it seemed like nothing more than a rough game that would soon be over. But the moment Danelle tried to rise, all illusions of optimism vanished. A searing pain exploded in her shattered pelvis, so sharp that white sparks danced before her eyes. Her legs refused to bear weight, buckling as if they no longer belonged to her. She tried again, and again. Each attempt ended in the same agony. Utter helplessness. Slowly, but with crushing certainty, she realized something was badly broken inside. This wasn't a bruise or a sprain. It was a catastrophic injury that had turned her once powerful body into a prison. She lay on a narrow rock ledge, barely 4 feet wide, forced to accept a brutal truth. She could no longer walk. 3 miles separated her from the nearest trail, and no one knew where she had gone. Her only chance was to crawl. By early afternoon, she began the painful descent. Dropping 30 feet to the canyon floor felt endless. Every inch required focus. Her right knee pushed, her arms dragged her forward, while her left leg trailed uselessly behind. Each movement deepened the pain, warning of serious internal damage. At the bottom, she checked her waist pack. The supplies were pitiful: a raspberry energy gel, a flimsy shower cap, and 2 ibuprofen tablets. She swallowed the pills immediately, washing them down with the last drops of water in her bottle. Then the crawl continued. Cold sand, sharp thorns, patches of snow that burned her palms. The canyon floor offered only jagged rocks and merciless indifference. By 5 p.m., as daylight faded, she had made it only to a flat slab near a small puddle of water. 5 hours of non-stop torment, just a quarter of a mile covered. The math of survival was brutal. Nearly 3 miles still to go, and her strength was draining fast. Darkness fell swiftly and the temperature dropped into the 20s. To fight the cold, she forced her body into constant motion, tightening her core, tapping her legs, rubbing her hands together. Tez pressed against her side, laying his head on her stomach, a living heater in the frozen night. When Danelle reached for the shower cap to cover her head, she realized it was gone, lost in the fall. Above the canyon rim, the night sky blazed with stars. Dozens of meteors streaked overhead, a sight that would once have filled her with wonder. Now it was only a cruel reminder of her smallness beneath an indifferent universe. That same night, as Danelle fought the cold on the canyon floor, another unease was growing back in Moab. Dorothy Rosenall sat in the kitchen of her modest home, staring out at something unusual. Her neighbor's house glowed for a second night in a row. The curtains stayed open, and the cold blue light of a laptop flickered in the window. At 76, Dorothy had a sharp instinct for these things. She could easily tell the difference between a neighbor's ordinary absence and a true cause for alarm. What unsettled her most wasn't even the light burning in the windows, but the absence of the dog. Taz, a 3-year-old shepherd retriever mix, had become part of her daily routine. Every morning he would leap over the low fence, scratch at her door with the persistence of a postman, and collect his 2 dog biscuits. One he ate right there, the other he proudly carried home like a treasure. That ritual never changed until Wednesday, December 13th. Danelle often traveled for races or training camps, and during those trips Dorothy took care of small tasks. Collecting the mail, making sure the pipes didn't freeze. It was the kind of neighborly habit you'd expect in a small town. But something was different this time. Normally, Danelle would let her know before leaving, lock up the house, and switch off the lights. Now, for the second night in a row, the house glowed unnaturally bright. By the morning of December 14th, Dorothy's unease hardened into resolve. She dialed the number of Danelle's parents in Evergreen, Colorado. The brief conversation became the first link in a chain of events that would ultimately decide the outcome of this story. Meanwhile, back in the canyon, a new day brought a flicker of false hope. Taz had found a stick and was happily playing, tail wagging, radiating an optimism that made Danelle smile. For him, the day promised new chances. His energy carried the belief that everything could still turn out fine. She forced down her only energy gel and tried to refill her bottle from a shallow puddle, but the surface was sealed by a thin layer of ice. She broke it with the cap, managed a few sips, and then attempted to shift again. The moment she rolled to her side and tried to push up on her arms, a savage spasm shot through her body. Her desperate cry echoed off the canyon walls. Startled, Tez rushed to lick her face, but there was nothing more he could do. Another attempt ended the same way. Her body simply refused to respond, leaving her pinned to the ground. For hours she screamed into the silence. Her voice bounced between the cliffs, creating the cruel illusion of an answer, then vanished into emptiness. By midday, she knew no one was coming. The canyon was too remote, too well hidden from any passerby. Her condition was worsening. Her abdomen had begun to swell, and a hard lump was forming beneath the skin, an unmistakable sign of internal bleeding, which she recognized from her medical training. Time was slipping away, her strength fading, and with every hour her chances grew smaller. Even Taz's behavior shifted. Instead of lying close for warmth, he started pacing in circles, disappearing for short stretches, only to return more anxious each time. Animals often sense the approach of death before people do, and their actions can become an unsettling warning. Human willpower alone may not be enough. That same morning, December 14th, Dorothy picked up the phone once again. She told Gary and Peggy Ballengee, Danelle's parents in Evergreen, that their daughter's house had been lit for a third straight night and that Taz hadn't come for his daily treats. It was as if time inside that house had simply frozen. Danelle's parents knew she often left on sudden training trips, but this time their neighbor's anxious words pushed them into action. They began calling friends and acquaintances, only to hear the same answer again and again. No one had seen her, no one had heard from her, and no one was expecting her anytime soon. By the evening of December 14th, her parents finally contacted the Moab police. Technically, it was still too soon to file a formal missing person report, but the troubling circumstances demanded immediate attention. The next morning, December 15th, the case was assigned to Detective Craig Shumway. In his 4 years serving a town full of adventurers and thrill-seekers, he'd learned not to jump to conclusions. Most of the time, these cases turned out the same. A locked house, an absent car, an owner out in the mountains. Situations like that happened almost weekly. But when he checked the house on Cliff Drive, everything Dorothy had described was confirmed. Lamps still burned, the curtains hadn't moved, and the laptop was running non-stop. It looked as if everyday life had been cut off in an instant. After a fruitless trip to a popular trailhead, Shumway followed his gut. Later, he admitted it felt as though he simply knew where to go. That instinct led him to a parking lot in Canyonlands, where he found Danelle's white Ford Ranger, the kayak still strapped to the roof. Meanwhile, by the third day, her condition had become critical. She could no longer perform even the simplest movements to generate warmth. Her legs no longer obeyed her. Her hands shook with exhaustion and cold, and the swelling under her skin spread wider. A clear sign the internal bleeding hadn't stopped. Time was down to hours, maybe a single day. That's when she experienced what she would later call something mystical. A voice rose inside her. Not her own, not human, but firm and commanding. Move. Don't stop. Keep your legs tapping. It was wordless, undeniable. Though Danelle had never thought of herself as religious or someone who believed in the supernatural, the command felt external, as if it came from outside her. She obeyed, faintly tapping her feet against the rock, clinging to the last spark of life. Her thoughts drifted to the people she loved. She pictured her parents in Evergreen, unaware she was even missing. She remembered her teammates, with whom she had shared victories and defeats. And then there was the man from Leadville, whom she'd met just weeks before. Their story was only beginning, yet now he represented the family and future she would never have. The hardest part was the unsaid things, the words of love left unspoken, the phone calls postponed for tomorrow, the embraces she had assumed were guaranteed. Now, she might leave without saying goodbye, and that realization deepened her agony more than the pain ever could. By evening, she gathered the last of her strength and made a desperate choice. Go, Taz, she whispered. Find help. It was her final gamble, sending her only companion out to search for people. The odds were slim, but Taz's behavior had already begun to change. On the third day, he started disappearing for longer stretches. At first, Danelle thought he sensed her approaching death and was preparing to survive on his own. But the truth was very different. Taz had taken on a mission of his own. His new route became a 5-mile dash from the canyon to the Amos back parking lot and back again. He would sprint toward civilization, search for people, then return to check on his owner, only to set off once more. 3 days without food didn't slow his determination. But his last return was different. The anxious look was gone, replaced by a tail wagging with excitement. His posture had shifted, he looked like a dog carrying news. Danelle, half-conscious from blood loss, couldn't make sense of it. But Taz sensed what she could not. The rumble of engines in the distance, voices echoing between the cliffs, the faint scent of people drawing near. A rescue operation had begun. On the evening of December 15th, exactly 8 p.m., the Grand County Search and Rescue Team gathered at the Amos back parking lot. 12 specialists, led by John Marshall, bent over maps, marking out search zones. Finding her truck had narrowed the area to just a few square miles, but even that much terrain could take days to cover. Marshall remembered Danelle well from the 2006 Primal Quest race, where he had served as a medic. He knew she wasn't the kind of athlete who simply got lost in the desert. If she hadn't returned, something serious had happened. 2 nights in the freezing cold had already turned the search into a race against time. Every passing hour chipped away at the chance of finding her alive. And that's when a dog appeared at the parking lot. At first, the animal seemed like a distraction. A medium-sized mutt darted between rescuers, barking, desperate for attention, but refusing to be caught. They were moments away from calling animal control when someone pointed out that the description matched the missing athlete's dog. Could be Taz. Marshall made a decision that would change the course of the mission. Don't try to catch him. Follow him. Immediately, Taz revealed his purpose. He sprinted toward town, creating chaos as though deliberately drawing attention to himself, then spun around and bolted straight back toward the canyon. 60-year-old Bigo Gart, a veteran rescuer and train tracker with the U.S. Forest Service, was assigned to pursue the dog on an ATV. What he discovered within half an hour would go down as one of the most dramatic rescues in Grand County history, proving that a dog's loyalty can literally mean the difference between life and death. At 3:38 p.m. that day, Gart braked at the edge of a rocky ledge and looked down. 1,000 feet below, on a narrow shelf of stone, lay a still figure in a red jacket. Beside her sat Taz, his head resting on her chest. The sight was overwhelming. A woman and her dog, 3 days locked in a fight for survival where most would have lasted only hours. "I'm so glad to see you," Danelle whispered as Gart lowered himself down using a makeshift rope system. Tears ran down her face, the first in 52 hours that weren't from pain or fear. "I'm glad you're able to say that," he replied, quickly assessing her condition. She was conscious and able to speak, but the signs of hypothermia and severe injuries were unmistakable. The veteran rescuer worked with practiced precision. He wrapped her in a thick sleeping bag, slid warm gloves over her hands to prevent further frostbite, and kept one hand on the radio, relaying coordinates and calling in a medical helicopter. With the other, he never stopped talking to her, keeping her conscious. Every minute counted. Taz greeted the rescuer as if his mission was finally complete. His tail wagged furiously. He licked the man's hand and let out what seemed like a sigh of relief. "You've got one remarkable dog," Gart said, glancing at the loyal companion whose quick thinking had just saved his owner's life. Roughly 50 minutes later, the helicopter arrived. By then, several more rescuers had reached the scene, turning what began as a solitary effort into a fully coordinated operation. Danelle was lifted into the air, cocooned in a sleeping bag, half conscious, but alive. Her 3-day battle for survival was over. What awaited her now was a new kind of struggle, the long road to recovery. At St. Mary's Hospital in Grand Junction, doctors were stunned by what they found. Her pelvis was shattered in 4 places. 3 vertebrae were damaged, and she had lost nearly a third of her blood to internal bleeding. "People with injuries like these rarely survive the night," admitted the chief surgeon. "You lasted more than 2 days in the cold, where most would be gone within hours." On December 19th in Denver, she underwent a grueling 6-hour surgery. Surgeons essentially had to rebuild her pelvis, reinforcing it with titanium plates and screws to hold the fragments together. The prognosis was grim. Doctors doubted she would ever walk again, let alone return to competition. The emotional turning point came during her reunion with Taz, filmed for the Today Show. The dog hadn't seen his owner since she was lifted out by helicopter, and when he finally did, his joy was explosive. He barked, whimpered, wagged his tail endlessly, and leapt around her hospital bed as though the world had been set right again. Danelle wept, the crew wept, and so did millions watching at home. Then began a different kind of marathon, the marathon of recovery. 3 months in a wheelchair, then walkers, crutches, and finally unsteady but independent steps. She approached rehab the same way she had once trained for world titles, with a plan, discipline, and relentless determination. 10 months after her fall, she crossed the finish line of the Moab Half Marathon. Her time was slower, her limp obvious, but none of that mattered. The crowd rose to their feet and cheered, seeing in her a living testament that willpower can conquer the impossible. Taz was awarded the National Hero Dog Award by the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. His story inspired documentaries, children's books, and even became part of rescue training programs, an example of how animals can be true partners in survival. But for Danelle, all the honors and recognition meant little compared to one simple truth. In the darkest moment of her life, her dog never left her side and never gave up. In 2011, she became the director of the Moab Trail Marathon and made sure the site of her fall was part of the official course. That section was given a new name, Taz Canyon, a lasting tribute to the dog who proved that loyalty is measured not in words, but in actions. Every year, an aid station stands there, staffed by 2 rescuers from the original team, including John Marshall. Danelle's personal life also found its happy ending. She married the man from Leadville, the one she thought of during her darkest hours in the canyon. Together they had 2 sons and opened a small restaurant in Moab, which soon became a favorite gathering place for athletes and adventurers. Today, she still races from time to time, but now she does it alongside her family, blending competition with travel. In a 2018 interview, Danelle reflected, "I was convinced I would die out there, among the rocks. Now I have a family and a life I never even dreamed of. I don't know all the reasons why I survived, but I know this: sometimes real rescue comes on 4 legs." Her story makes us question how much we truly understand about animals. How aware are they really? Are they capable of conscious decisions we usually think of as uniquely human? And what if Taz wasn't just following instinct, but carrying out his own rescue plan? If that's true, then how much else in this world do we underestimate? Share your own stories about pets in the comments. And if this one touched your heart, hit the like button. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.